The silence in the corridors of the Russell Senate office building this morning is not the absence of noise. It is the sound of a circuit breaking. For 4 years, the machinery of the Republican Party operated on a single, unified frequency alignment with the executive. Dissent was treated as friction, and friction was eliminated. But in the last 12 hours, that transmission has been interrupted. The phones in the whip's office are not ringing with orders from the White House. They are ringing with questions from inside the caucus. And the question is no longer, how do we pass this? The question is, how do we survive it? A threshold has been crossed. It was not crossed with a shout or a press conference, but with the quiet scratching of pens on the War Powers Resolution. When Republican senators joined the opposition to advance a measure limiting executive military authority, it was not a political maneuver. It was a structural reflex. The legislative branch, long dormant, is attempting to reboot its immune system. They have realized that the man in the Oval Office does not view the Constitution as a blueprint for governance. He views it as a zoning regulation, something to be bypassed, granted a variance, or simply bulldozed if the project requires it. And to understand why this revolt is happening now, one must look at the physical evidence. The destruction of the East Wing is not merely a renovation project. It is a statement of intent. When the bulldozers struck the 1, 2, 3-year-old limestone, they did not wait for preservationists. They did not wait for debate. They moved with the speed of a demolition crew that knows the permits might be revoked if they pause for lunch. This is the governing philosophy of the second term distilled into a single image, fast, irreversible, and unconcerned with what stood there before. The debris pile on Pennsylvania Avenue is not just rubble. It is a metaphor for the institutional guardrails that are currently being fed into the grinder. But the senators whispering in the cloakrooms are not concerned with architecture. They are concerned with the monopoly on violence. The warning from Senator Chris Murphy regarding the use of force against NATO territory was not hyperbole. It was a reading of the new rules of engagement. The executive branch has begun to process geopolitics through the lens of distressed asset acquisition. Greenland is not viewed as sovereign territory of a treaty ally. It is viewed as a property with a closing date. And when a president frames a purchase offer with the implicit backing of the world's most powerful military, the line between negotiation and coercion evaporates. This is where the machinery of the party begins to grind against itself. The Republican establishment has spent decades building a global security architecture based on predictability. NATO is the load-bearing wall of that structure. To treat Article 5 as a variable in a real estate deal is to take a sledgehammer to the foundation while sleeping on the second floor. The senators know this. They understand that if the concept of collective defense is commodified, the security guarantee that underpins the Western order creates a vacuum, and history abhors a vacuum. It fills it with chaos. And yet, the reaction from the White House to this legislative pushback was not negotiation. It was rage. The reported phone call to Senator Susan Collins was not a conversation between co-equal branches of government. It was a confrontation between a CEO and a subordinate who refused to sign a loyalty pledge. This is the friction point. The president believes his mandate is absolute. The Senate believes its authority is constitutional. These two plates are now grinding against each other, and the tremors are being felt in every committee room in Washington. But the war powers fight is only the surface tremor. The deeper fracture lies in the weaponization of the emergency. When the legislative gears froze, the executive reached for the emergency brake not to stop the car, but to drift it around the obstacle. The declaration of a national emergency regarding Venezuelan oil assets is a masterclass in this technique. It reframes an economic objective securing resources for multinational energy corporations as an existential security crisis. By attaching the word emergency to a policy goal, the executive bypasses the slow, deliberative friction of Congress. He unlocks powers reserved for war and catastrophe and applies them to a balance sheet. The Republicans watching this unfold are not blind to the utility of the move. They appreciate the outcome: cheap oil, corporate dominance, leverage, but they are terrified of the precedent. Because a mechanism built to bypass the legislature today can be used by a different operator tomorrow. If an emergency is whatever the president says it is, then the legislature is no longer a check on power. It is merely an audience. This is the calculation keeping McConnell's protégés awake at night. It is not a moral dilemma. It is a survival instinct. They are looking at the polls, where the president's approval is sliding and anxiety over the economy is rising. They see the agitation over immigration raids and the lingering toxicity of the Epstein files. And they realize that tying their political fortunes to a leader who treats the separation of powers as a suggestion is a high-risk leverage play. If the market turns, if the finest ballroom ever built becomes a symbol of excess in a time of scarcity, the bill will come due. And the voters will not be looking for nuanced explanations about executive privilege. The internal revolt is also fueled by the erasure of history. It is a subtle purge, but for those who know where to look. It is chilling. The removal of references to the impeachments and the January 6th riots from the National Portrait Gallery is not just curation, it is sanitization. It is the Soviet technique of airbrushing the fallen commissar out of the photograph. When a government begins to edit its own memory, it signals a desire to create a permanent present, where the leader has always been right, and the failures never happened. But the marble plaques installed in the White House corridor tell a different story. They are not erased, they are weaponized. The insults heaped upon predecessors. The caption, labeling a rival the worst president in American history. This is not the behavior of a confident administration. It is the behavior of a regime obsessed with dominance. It lowers the presidency from an institution to a combat sport. And for the institutionalists in the GOP, this degradation of the office is a liability. It strips away the majesty that protects the power. When you turn the Lincoln bedroom into a gold-plated showroom, you do not elevate the occupant. You lower the room. And beneath the surface of these symbolic fights, the gears of the administrative state are being stripped. The delay in document releases. The stalling of Inspector General reports. These are not clerical errors. They are the sand thrown into the engine of oversight. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has identified the pattern, a systematic refusal to comply with the statutory timeline. The administration knows that transparency is the enemy of the emergency. If the public sees the raw data, the costs, the risks, the legal shakiness of the oil seizure, the narrative collapses. So the strategy is delay. Flood the zone with noise. Build a ballroom. Declare a crisis. Rename an airport. Keep the eye moving so it never rests on the ledger. But the ledger exists, and the red flags are beginning to pile up on the desks of the oversight committees. These are not accusations yet. They are procedural failures. But in Washington, a procedural failure is the smoke that indicates a fire in the wiring. The Republicans are now faced with a choice. Do they help hide the smoke, or do they pull the fire alarm? The choice is complicated by the president's demand for total submission. He has seized control of cultural institutions like the Kennedy Center, purging the board and installing loyalists who renamed the building after him. He has turned the United States Institute of Peace into a branded subsidiary. He pushes to put his face on the currency and his name on the airport. This is not just ego. It is a branding exercise designed to make the leader synonymous with the state. If you oppose Trump, you are not opposing a politician. You are opposing the Trump Institute of Peace, the Trump Kennedy Center, the face on the dollar bill. You are opposing America itself. This total integration of the man and the state is the ultimate goal. It renders dissent treasonous by definition. And that is why the resistance from within the party is so significant. It is the antibodies of the Republic trying to reject a foreign organism. The senators pushing the War Powers Resolution are asserting a radical proposition that the state exists independently of the president, that the law is a fixed point, not a variable dependent on the mood in the Oval Office. The friction is intensifying because the president refuses to acknowledge limits. When faced with the War Powers vote, he did not offer a compromise. He offered threats. He treats the legislative branch as a subsidiary that is underperforming. But the Senate is not a subsidiary. It is a co-equal board of directors with the power to liquidate the CEO. And for the first time, members of that board are checking the bylaws. They are looking at the Arc de Triomphe project, the massive arch Trump wants to build to celebrate himself, and they see the hubris of an emperor. They look at the polls, showing voters care about health care and affordability, while the president focuses on vanity projects and gold fixtures, and they calculate the distance between the leader's obsessions and the public's needs. That gap is where elections are lost, and Republicans hate losing elections more than they fear angry phone calls. So the revolt grows. It is quiet. It is technical. It is fought with procedural motions and delayed confirmations. But it is real. The party that once acted as a phalanx is fracturing into small cells of resistance. They are asking themselves if the emergency is the situation in Venezuela, or the situation in the West Wing. The danger, of course, is that the president knows this. He senses the hesitation, and a leader who feels his control slipping does not retreat. He accelerates. He raises the stakes. He turns the emergency dial from 6 to 10. If Congress won't fund the ballroom, donors will. If Congress won't approve the war, the emergency will authorize it. If the courts block the demolition, the bulldozers will move faster. We are entering the phase of the presidency where the constraints of law are viewed as personal insults. The machine is running hot. And the cooling systems, the advisors, the lawyers, the norms have been disabled or bypassed. The only thing standing between the impulse and the action is a handful of senators who are deciding, right now, whether to stand firm or to fold. And as they weigh their options, the dust from the East Wing continues to settle on the White House lawn, a reminder that what took a century to build can be turned into a memory in a matter of days. The structure is fragile. The institutions are made of parchment and trust, not steel, and parchment burns. But the disintegration of the East Wing is merely the demolition phase. The construction phase is far more revealing. While the bulldozers clear the debris of the past, the blueprints for the future are being unrolled on the resolute desk. And these plans do not resemble the civic architecture of a republic. They resemble the imperial branding of a proprietary state. Consider the arch. It is not a rumor. It is a design proposal confirmed by senior staff. A massive limestone structure, modeled after the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, intended to rise on the banks of the Potomac. Ostensibly, it is to celebrate the 250th birthday of the nation. But when pressed on the true purpose of the monument, the president pointed to himself. This is the architectural manifestation of the new governing philosophy. The state does not exist to serve the people. The state exists to reflect the glory of the leader. In a functioning democracy, monuments are erected by the grieving or the grateful, decades after the leader has passed. They are the crystallized memory of a nation. But in this new iteration of Washington, the monument is a preemptive strike against history. It is an attempt to cement a legacy in stone before the term is even finished, ensuring that no future administration can erase the name without using dynamite. And the branding does not stop at the river's edge. It extends to the currency in your pocket. The proposal to place the president's face on a $1 coin, or even a $250 bill, is not merely vanity. It is psychological warfare. Currency is the most ubiquitous symbol of state authority. By printing his likeness on the medium of exchange, The executive attempts to insert himself into every transaction, every wage payment, every purchase of bread. It is a signal that the economy itself operates by his permission. This is why the renaming of the United States Institute of Peace to the Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace is not a trivial detail. It is a hostile takeover of the language. The institute was created by Congress to be an independent arbiter of conflict resolution. By attaching a partisan brand to a neutral agency, the executive destroys its function. A Trump Institute cannot mediate. It can only dictate. The credibility of the institution is liquidated to purchase a short-term marketing victory. And here lies the paradox that is fracturing the Republican coalition. The party of fiscal conservatism and limited government is now being asked to fund a palatial ballroom and a self-referential arch. While the deficit balloons, they are being asked to applaud the renaming of Dulles International Airport for a living politician, turning infrastructure into a loyalty test. The senators who spent careers preaching against the cult of personality are now forced to live inside one. And the cognitive dissonance is becoming deafening. But do not be distracted by the marble and the gold. These are the shiny objects designed to catch the light. The real structural damage is happening in the dark, in the quiet reallocation of resources that you do not see until it is too late. Pause this video for a moment. Do not look at the politicians. Look at the grocery receipt in your pocket. Compare the price of eggs, of milk, of fuel to what it was 2 years ago. That gap between the price on the shelf and the wage in your account is not an accident of the market. It is the hidden tax of a government that prioritizes vanity projects over stability. While the White House plans a 4-story ballroom to retire the tents, the average voter is struggling to retire their debt. This disconnect is the fuel for the fire. The administration believes that if they build enough statues and fly enough flags, the public will forget the cost of living. They believe that grandeur is a substitute for governance. But history teaches a brutal lesson. You cannot eat a monument. And when the economic anxiety of the electorate meets the extravagant spending of the ruler, the result is not applause. It is upheaval. The danger is that the administration knows this. They see the same internal polling that the senators see. They know that approval is slipping and that the sugar high of the rallies is wearing off. And this is where the foreign policy pivot becomes terrifying. Because when a leader cannot solve the problems at home, the temptation to look abroad becomes irresistible. The revival of the Greenland purchase idea is not a joke. It is a probe. It is a test of the international system's elasticity. By treating a sovereign territory of a NATO ally as a distressed asset to be acquired, the executive signals that the post-war order is open for renegotiation. The fear in the Pentagon whispered in the E-ring, never spoken on camera, is that this transactional mindset will eventually be applied to Article 5 itself. If Greenland is just real estate, then what is Estonia? What is Taiwan? Are they allies to be defended, or properties to be flipped? If the president views geopolitics as a series of bilateral deals rather than a web of binding commitments, then the security guarantee that has prevented a third world war for 80 years evaporates. A treaty is only as strong as the word of the man enforcing it, and if that word is contingent on the deal, then the deterrent is gone. This is the nightmare scenario that drove the Senate to the war powers vote. It was not about Venezuela. It was about drawing a line before the transaction mindset leads to a kinetic miscalculation. The senators understand that you cannot run a superpower like a family office. In a family office, you can fire the lawyer who tells you no. In a superpower, the no is the only thing preventing a nuclear cascade. And yet, the no is getting quieter. The purge of the Smithsonian and the National Portrait Gallery demonstrates that the administration is willing to rewrite the past to suit the present. By removing references to the impeachments and the January 6th riot, they are not just editing captions, they are attempting to lobotomize the national memory. A country that cannot remember its mistakes is condemned to repeat them. The gap on the museum wall is not empty space, it is a lie of omission. We have seen this movie before. In the twilight of every centralized regime, the architecture gets grander, the statues get taller, and the history books get thinner. The leader becomes obsessed with the legacy in the abstract, the name on the building, the face on the coin, while the concrete reality of the nation crumbles. The ultimate tragedy is that the ruthless architect is building on a foundation of sand. The ballroom may rise. The arch may be designed. The airport may be renamed. But these honors are bestowed by authority, not by acclaim. And authority that is seized rather than earned is brittle. As the source text notes, a future president can scrape the name off the wall. The currency can be withdrawn. The gold can be pried loose. Unless the system itself is altered so deeply that there is no future president in the traditional sense. Unless the emergency becomes the permanent state of affairs. Unless the institutions of oversight are so hollowed out that they can no longer function as a corrective mechanism. That is the question hanging over Washington right now. Is this a temporary deviation, a chaotic interlude that will be corrected by the next election? Or is it a structural renovation? Are we watching the demolition of the East Wing or the demolition of the Republic? The senators checking their phones in the cloakroom are betting that the system can still save itself. They are betting that the parchment of the Constitution still has the strength to hold back the steel of the bulldozers. But they are hedging their bets. They are issuing statements, but they are not yet issuing subpoenas. They are voting on war powers, but they are not yet voting on impeachment. They are waiting to see which way the wind blows. But you do not have the luxury of waiting. The wind is blowing through your bank account. It is blowing through your grocery store. It is blowing through the empty spaces on the museum walls where the truth used to be. The architects of this new order are counting on your fatigue. They are counting on you to scroll past the outrage, to accept the Trump Institute of Peace as normal, to accept the emergency as necessary. They believe that if they flood the zone with enough noise, you will stop listening to the signal. They believe that you are too tired to care about the difference between a president and a king. Are they right? The phone is ringing in the Senate office, but the most important phone is the one in your pocket. The signal is fading, but it is not gone. The machinery of the Republic is grinding, smoking, and shaking, but it has not yet stopped. It requires an operator. It requires a citizen who refuses to accept the emergency as the baseline. The bulldozers are fast, but the truth is stubborn. The arch is just stone. The ballroom is just wood. The system is only a shared hallucination, sustained by our consent. If we withdraw that consent, the architecture falls. The choice is no longer between left and right. It is between the rule of law and the rule of one. The architects have drawn the plans, but they forgot one thing: you are the terrain. And the terrain ultimately decides what stands and what falls. Will you be the foundation for their vanity, or will you be the friction that stops the machine?